Hey everyone who stumbled upon us. We are a new Chelsea fan podcast called We Burn Blue. We're two mates who chat a lot of Chelsea, and we decided to take our chats to the public domain and make a podcast. I'm Prashant. I'm one of your hosts, along with my friend Sharon. I've been a fan of Chelsea since about 2003, 2004, coinciding with the Abramovich era. I followed the club regularly since. So I'm going to be bringing my take on everything I'm reading and hearing about the club and just bring the vibes basically. And I'm going to hand it over to Sharan, who's our in-house tactico. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. So that's a pretty heavy pressure you put on my shoulders. But yeah, I think Prashant and I really, we weren't necessarily in communication back when we both became fans of the club. But it's that Abramovich era. It's the money era that got me interested. So just ready to admit that straight off the bat. And yeah, I think Prashant, you're selling yourself short on the on that side because I think you pay way more attention to the club than I do. Because as you said, my main interest is just the style of football and how a manager can adapt his tactics and how he gets the best out of his players. So that's definitely what I want to add to the podcast. But you mentioned the reason why we're doing this, and I think it's important to acknowledge that this is just a very safe space for us to, listen to each other while Chelsea drag us through the mud as fans. Like there's a lot of stress at all times being a Chelsea fan, so it's therapy for me.
Yeah.
And when we were prepping for this, Prashant thought it was a good idea if we each gave our each kind of told everyone our favorite player and our favorite Chelsea goal, or I guess Chelsea moment, whichever one you want to do, Prashant. So why don't you tell us?
Yeah, for me, I think favorite player, it's tough, but I think up there, I remember when I started watching the club, Lampard and Terry for me were two of the players I really sort of said these guys are like club legends. And I mean, of course, I think Lampard just edges it for me from a personal perspective as well, where I like to sort of I s- I play a lot of defense when I do play football, but I do see myself as more of a midfielder in that Lampard-esque sort of late run to the box role. And for me, Lampard's got to be up there. My favorite goal has got to be Hazard single-handedly taking on Arsenal's sitting Coquelin down, running through the defense and scoring versus Czech in that game. I just think that was like one of his many moments of individual brilliance. Yourself?
Me, man, like you and I are going to be quite similar on the favorite players because I think we were just part of that era.
Yeah, fair enough.
That was when we were young enough to enjoy like literally waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning for games. And just living every moment of the club. So I was gonna say literally you pick any of the four players that was the spine of that team. So you got Petr Cech, JT, Lamps, and Drogba.
Of course, yes.
I've put like if you held a gun to my head, I would definitely say Drogba because Prashant and I kind of both have spent a lot of time of our lives in West Africa. So yeah, Drogba definitely is a little closer to home. But JT maybe less so, just because of the whole racism thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so yeah, man, like it wouldn't be right to put him up at number one, but I feel like a lot of the leadership skills that I've learned throughout my experience in life is has come through watching him play at the back. So these
Yeah,
guys were like the
yeah.
four leaders of the club in a way. So, and in terms of favorite goal, I'll keep it brief. It's Drogba versus Liverpool. It's the one you definitely remember because
The
he
banger.
literally like yeah he does it on a swivel off of a half volley. I
Yeah,
mean
the
that's
volley. Yeah.
crazy. Completely 180 turn back to goal, and it goes top corner. So yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. I will say yeah, Hazard's is probably up there, maybe a little bit higher because of the Arsenal factor in that as well. But yeah, man, I think yeah, that for me is my favorite goal.
Fair enough, fair enough. In terms of the pod and what you mentioned about therapy, I think it's also important to sort of, yeah, acknowledge that, like, being a Chelsea fan, there's never a dull week. So having this opportunity to sort of speak about this and share our thoughts, which we generally do quite a bit with each other, just sort of for something that we literally were like, oh well, why don't we just make this a podcast? And it's come together in a matter of days, and I'm hoping this is a fun ride. So we also want to obviously uh, focus a bit on the tactics, on our opinion of other aspects of the club, for example, directors and who should be responsible for where we are right now, the managerial rollovers, the commercial aspects. So that's our vision.
No, that's pretty much it. The vibes guy is raising the expectations already. I love it. So, to get things started, we kind of need to show that we are indeed up to date with the club. And what better way to do that than talk about some transfer news? This is the transfer watch section that, again, Prashant's going to take us through because he's more of the ears to the ground guy. So he's directly in touch with Fabrizio Romano. Why don't you take
Yeah,
us away on that?
way to oversell that. Yeah, the biggest one, I think everyone must have been rejoicing. Cole Palmer extending to 2033. Um, there is a wage improvement as well, I believe, which is just, I think, well deserved all around. So kudos to the club for closing that. Um, and we get another 9 years of Cole Palmer. And that celebration is quickly becoming a favorite. I don't know if you saw over the break when Henry Paez and Estevao were scoring, they were also doing the Cole Palmer Cole celebration. So that was quite cool. Um,
These guys become legends way too young in their career. You know what I mean?
yeah, I think it's just a generational thing. And then of course there's a lot of stuff to be discussed around movement in the club. We obviously know that we have what 43, 44 players in the squad. You have at least there's talk of at least 10 to no 15 to 18 players who need to be sold or moved out, and you have a limited number of loan slots. So it's quite crazy. I expect it to be a very very busy next couple of weeks before the transfer window closes. The big names of course
But
are
it seems to me that we're hearing still a lot more about incomings, right?
yeah, which is exactly what we're getting into, right? So the big names in terms of transfers in are Osimhen from Napoli, which I mean, there's a lot of talk about him and will he actually be worth the outlay? His wages are supposedly in line with what Sterling is getting, and Sterling is of course an outlier in the wage structure. They're expecting he wants around 325K a week, which completely breaks the wage structure. And is he actually worth it? Now, I mean, that's debatable. I have a soft spot for him being that he's Nigerian, but it remains to be seen. I think he'll come good, but the latest I've read is that there's Napoli are proposing we give them Lukaku plus Cassidy plus 45 million in exchange for Osimhen, which to me is, I mean, Cassidy is someone who seems surplus in the midfield. Lukaku is someone who we want off our books and he wants to go to Napoli anyway. I think the 45 million seems maybe 10 million too much for me, but I could see how they reached that valuation. What are your thoughts on Osimhen?
I mean, I'm just gonna add my 2 cents on the potential deal that you brought up. I would say do it, get this guy's wages off the book. Cassidy is clearly not going to be used, but he's a talent. I think in
Yeah.
10 years' time, he'll be a very, very high level center mid. Maybe just not at Chelsea.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, like you say, 45M is 10M, maybe too pricey. I wonder if, we can just throw in a couple more players in there, that we don't need. Because we have players, right? If they
we
can
do
do
have
straight
players.
like a 1 to 4 player swap, I think I would do that in a heartbeat. But no, I think you go out and get him. Because and I think we'll do a separate pod on this, which is on the transfer strategy that the Clear Lake boys have been, kind of sticking to for the most
Mm,
part.
mm. Yeah.
We'll assess kind of like how effective that is, and whether that was the right thing to do from the beginning. But yeah, I think you need to add experience to the squad.
Mm.
And if this is what it takes, and he fits into the manager's style of play, then you've got to pay a little bit over and above the odds, because at the end of the day, these are the Premier League premiums, right? They know they can
Yeah. Yeah.
charge us a little bit more.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's true.
So moving on from Osimhen, I mean, I do hope we get him, but um, is there another target that we're planning to bring in, especially in the attacking areas?
Yeah, of course, the other big name is João Felix. Um, and the whole Samo Omorodion deal collapsing, and then of course Connor being in limbo because of it. That's a whole other situation, to be honest. But in terms of incoming, João Felix is the other one who is being linked. Apparently the owners wanted him, Poch didn't want him, which is why he didn't extend last year, and now he's back on the radar. I don't know. I feel like I didn't really see him live up to any expectations that I had when he was with us for that however long it was. Was it what was it? Was it like half a season and he got like a red card in the first game or whatever? Just felt like he was so out of it. And I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think what counts against Felix is the fact that Pochettino didn't want him.
Yeah.
And Pochettino looks like, a vibes kind of guy, right? So, I mean, if anything, I would have thought Felix would have been his kind of player, like a baller.
Yeah.
But I guess that remains to be seen. I mean, a lot of questions can be asked about how we're going to balance Osimhen potentially and Felix and the plethora of players we have. So
So
on that
now I'm
note, why
gonna
don't
kind of,
we move over to
kick
our
off the
squad overview
what I think is one of the
Yeah,
most
section of the
important
pod?
parts of the pod.
Because it's basically a topic that's dominated our conversation throughout the summer. So the squad overview is looking pretty it's looking pretty insane.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if
To
I've ever
say the
seen a
least.
squad this size before. But I think we're going to go through it section by section. So, playing section by section. And Prashant, why don't you give us your take on the goalkeeping situation?
Yeah, so goalkeeping, we have Sanchez, Bettinelli, Petrovic, Bergstrom, and Kepa, who were all around last season on our books, and then Jorgensen's come in. And I mean, I think way too many, of course. I think Kepa looks like he's going to be out. Petrovic also, there's talk of him being out, which is surprising because he was doing quite well, but I think he's not going to really be sticking around. And I guess Bergstrom goes on a loan, leaving us with Sanchez, Jorgensen, and Bettinelli as our three.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
just to add on that, um, I'm a little surprised with what's going on with Petrovic. I understand the Kepa situation. To be honest,
yeah,
he kind of kicked himself out of the club with that whole sorry situation for the penalty shootout against City. Ever since then, my mind has been made that this guy is not a team player. So, um, yeah, I mean, aside from that, Petrovic, he was a great shot stopper last season. His distribution was solid, right? Maybe unspectacular, and maybe that's why Maresca is not interested in him. But
yeah.
I just wonder not taking him on the preseason maybe wasn't the right
He
thing to
had an
do
injury
because
apparently. He was carrying a knock, is why he didn't go, is what I read.
okay, because that's news to me.
Yeah,
But I think Bergstrom is never really going to play for the club, so that was a
yeah,
waste of a
yeah,
slot. Bettinelli didn't even get any minutes,
yeah,
so I don't know. Petrovic is young enough to improve his game, but I guess, like you say, the three you've picked out make the most sense.
yeah.
And what are you hearing? Are you hearing anything on their potential departures? Is there anything concrete?
Yeah, so I think with Kepa, Napoli are interested potentially, as well as if Madrid do sell Lunin, he might just go back there. Petrovic, might be a loan to Strasbourg, which to me seems like a waste of a loan spot. But I won't be surprised if they sort of pull off what they did with Diego Moreira as well, where they sold him after he had what some games in the PL2 squad and some a loan abroad. They sold him to Strasbourg, so they might do the same thing, which will be like a low transfer fee to Strasbourg, which is part of the Blue Co network, of course. Bettinelli is basically our Scott Carson, so I don't think him not playing is an issue. He's just there for vibes. And Bergstrom, like you said, probably doesn't stick around. So that's the goalkeepers. I think, and then of course we have a heavily bloated defensive uh roster, I guess.
Unit.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, unit.
But
Yeah,
I was just gonna add, I think Bettinelli, the advantage there is he's homegrown, right?
yeah, for sure.
Um,
Yeah, homegrown is a huge advantage. Yes.
yeah. So just in case any of our listeners actually did not know this, Chelsea are limited to a quota of how many players they can loan outside of loan to clubs outside of England. And how many is that, Prashant?
Yeah, that's six that we can loan internationally. And we've used up about three of them, if I'm not wrong. So we have another three. So international loan spots are limited, and like we mentioned earlier, we've got about 18 players that need to go out by our estimate. So yeah, we have a lot of maneuvering to do.
Yeah, so you've mentioned basically three keepers need to go. Um, Ideally, all are sales, but some may have to turn out to be loans. It depends how late we go into the window with that. But moving on to the defensive unit, you've got basically two right backs in James and Gusto, so we don't really need to cover that.
Yeah,
Maybe in a separate pod we can talk about James versus Gusto. I
yeah,
would definitely
fair.
love to talk about that. And I think we'll move on to the centre back department where we are absolutely stacked. Any names you want to pick out there?
Of course, the treatment of Trevor is quite shambolic. I think we both agreed that he ended the season as one of our best defenders and did not even go on the preseason shows and then be sort of barred from training with the first team using first team facilities. I think that's just really badly handled. Disasi is another one who crept up in a random conversation where apparently he's reconsidering his future at the club. So I don't know how that plays out. I think you know you're going to be seeing Tosin, Badiashile, Colwill, Fafana around, and then you have Chimpong and Humphreys who I think will go on loan. And theirs might be domestic loans. And you have Vega who's come in, who's obviously centre back slash left back and potentially a CDM as well. But yeah, I think the two I expect out are, I mean, or at least one for sure is Trevor, the two loans, and maybe Disasi or Badiashile, one of them with a surprise exit.
Yeah, that would be surprising, considering, they were also a centre back pairing once upon a time, I believe, in
Yes,
Monaco.
at Monaco,
Um,
correct.
yeah, so I mean, I've heard, I think Humphreys, there are some bids in for him, or they're trying to drum up some transfer interest. Pong, I do believe Maresca kind of sees something in him, which is why he made it to the preseason. I think he's quite highly rated. Vega adds a lot of versatility and cover, I think, considering his size, and he seems pretty quick from what I've seen in the preseason, quick enough for the back line. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think his role this year is going to be depth if we keep him.
yeah.
So moving on to maybe a position Vega would cover is the left back spot, where again we loaned out Caleb Wiley, and we've got two proper left backs, out and out left backs left. That's Kukurea and Ben Chilwell. So
Mhm.
basically, we're talking about where is Chilwell going to end up?
Exactly, because I think Maresca also said Chilwell doesn't suit his system. He made some sort of comments to that effect. And I think if his wages were lower, I think he would be out already. But I think the fact that he's on high wages, again, he's in excess of 200K, which is on the upper end of our structure. I think that combined with his injury record would make it very tough. I do think he might go out, but it's a question mark. I don't know who comes for him because I don't believe there's any interest in him so far. There was a rumor of, I think United was it, being interested, but then they already have a very injury-prone left back in Shaw, so I don't know if they'd want to have two injury-prone English left backs. So
Yeah, I mean, I think we can move swiftly on because you've made a very good point, and this is going to apply to a lot of players that Chelsea know they need to offload, and they make it sound as if it's going to be easily done, but it's really not, right? So,
exactly.
I mean, that applies to some other players, which we'll point out later. Why don't we move into central midfield? I mean, there's some very, very key players here, and I like the depth in there now that Lavia is back. But
Yes.
any other names you wanna mention?
Of course, I think I would be amiss if I didn't mention Connor and everything happening with him. I'm personally Team Connor. I don't think we should be selling him. I think the work he does off the ball will be missed if he's not there. But I also understand that Dewsbury Hall is supposed to be that sort of player that Connor is with a little more attacking impetus. Obviously, he played under Maresca at Leicester and he did have a good record. So, but I think we'll miss Connor. And then, of course, the players that are around, like you mentioned, Lavia is as good as a new player. I think Enzo, Caicedo, Dewsbury Hall, Lavia will be very, very prominent in that in the midfield. Um, Cassidy, we already mentioned in connection with the whole Osimhen move. I think he's going to be out. Kani Chukwemeka might also move, I think. And Angerin might also be a sale, maybe. I think these guys will also be departing. And then, of course, your midfield looks a little lighter than what it is right now, where we have 10 out and out CMs.
And
But what
it's
do you
it's worth mentioning we haven't seen Kellyman play at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess we reserve judgment on that. There's a chance he just goes into the under 21s or whatever they're referring to as the reserve squad these days. And
Yeah.
Ugo
Yeah.
Chukwu is. I actually thought he did pretty well considering he got limited minutes relative to the
I think
other
he
other
got two
players on the
goals.
team. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and coming off the bench against Inter, he definitely made an impact.
Mm.
It seems he understands the system reasonably well. Again, it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
But just to add on the Connor discussion, I want to be very clear. My stance is exactly the same as Prashant's on this. Outing players like Chaloba and Gallagher and replacing them with people, who are not proven and we have no idea like who they are. It really makes no sense to me. Again, this is another thing we can talk about in our discussion when we assess the transfer strategy. But yeah, I think if your manager is going to occasionally ask you to press, like let's say you're playing 38 games in a season guaranteed, right, for the Premier League. If for half of those you are going to ask the team to step up the pitch and press the opposition in their own half, Gallagher is one of the best in Europe, not just in England. There's a reason Atletico Madrid want him, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think aside from maybe the fact that he is pure profit, right? Think about who you're going to replace him with. You're actually selling one of the best pressing midfielders in Europe, with Dewsbury Hall, who I understand the logic because a new manager coming in, wants his system to be bedded in faster. And to do that, you need to have somebody on the pitch who's kind of helping you orchestrate, and showing the players how to respond to certain scenarios. But I mean, to completely write off Gallagher, to me, it just seems a bit unnecessary. It's kind of the club shooting themselves in the foot. But anyway,
Yeah.
we could do a whole new podcast just on the
Yeah.
treatment of our boys. But let's move quickly on because we've got the wingers and the forwards. The wingers is quite stacked, considering we're basically looking at playing only two of these every game. So you've got Sterling, who, like we said earlier, is going to fit that Chilwell problem, right, Prashant?
Yeah, I think he fits that problem, high wages, but I don't know. So we've got Sterling, Mudryk, Madueke, Palmer, George, Angelo, and Neto. Now, Neto is obviously a new acquisition, again, injury prone, but he has shown his quality for Wolves. So if he can live up to it and he can stay fit, I think he's a good addition. Mudryk, of course, with the amount we've outlaid, I don't think we let him go. I think Sterling, if a good bid comes, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him go. Same with Madueke. I think Newcastle are interested, and I think there is a willingness to sell. And of course Palmer is Palmer. I don't think there's any way he doesn't, he's not in our lineup. So I think yeah, we're cutting that down from seven to about three, maybe I don't know, between Angelo and George, who's sticking around. I think there may be some loans for them. So I think it's gonna look lighter come September for sure. And then you have obviously your striker situation where lots of outgoings expected there as well.
I'm just going to add my 2 cents here. I think
Yeah.
considering the current market situation, there's a high possibility we walk into the season with five wingers. Um, I would be a little bit disappointed if we sold Madueke, because he has actually shown the most thrust when it comes to his role in the system as a winger.
Mm.
He's actually it's actually built for him. Maresca wants his wingers to run at their men and either cut inside and shoot across, or hit the byline and then cut it back, or cross along the 6 yard line. He's showing all of those things. Maybe the end product isn't there. But if you sell him, then you're banking on Neto staying fit, and being able to do the same things. And I think walking into the season with five wingers isn't necessarily the worst thing, because Sterling can actually play on both wings. I would actually say Sterling might even do a better job on the right hand side, where he doesn't have to think too much. Sometimes he's running at his man, and I feel like his flair is kind of overtaken by his indecisiveness. So
No,
almost when he's playing as a right-footed player on the right wing, just hit the byline and cross it in. But
fair
anyway,
enough.
we need to move on to the strikers, because this is where the juice is. I mean, we're saying Osimhen is going to be added to this, hopefully,
Yeah,
and I don't know where we would put Felix, but I imagine he'd be listed as a striker in this,
yeah,
maybe
of
in this
course he's
current
also there as
mold.
well. Yeah, we talked about
So
him earlier,
so
but I completely forgot
we
about him.
we currently have we currently have seven strikers, and if you're adding
Yes.
those two, you have nine. So what's happening?
So remember, Jackson and Nkunku are both players who are versatile. Jackson can play off the left, and Nkunku also can play as a second striker. I think so. Those two are staying for sure. This Mark Gui, however you say his name, Mark
I've heard people say GUI, but I'm
Gui.
pretty
Yeah,
sure that that's wrong. Yeah,
I think there's a video on the club handle of how he pronounces it, but
I think it's GUI.
yeah, this kid, I think did well in preseason. Might get a loan if he doesn't stick around. Broya, Lukaku, Datro Fofana, I think are all going to be sales. And David Washington might be a loan as well. So that leaves us with Jackson and Kunku, Yue if we decide to keep him around. And I think that'll be contingent on whether we get both Osimhen and João Felix.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, what you said is spot on, but the ultimate thing is there a market for anyone, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that's something that remains to be seen with a lot of these players we've talked about today. But uh, in general, we've heard that they're aiming for a squad size of 23 to 24 players. When I first read that, I just broke out laughing, genuinely. So good luck to the directors who have to execute that. But that kind of wraps up our squad overview. And thanks to Prashant for keeping his ears to the ground and kind of letting us know as to who's more likely to leave and who's looking at staying. And then, of course, the small matters of adding players to a massive squad. But yeah, I think I'll hand it over to Prashant from here for the rest of the pod.
Yeah, so moving on from the squad and potentials to another juicy aspect, which is the tactics, right? So, what's your take? As I said, I didn't really watch too much of the preseason. I probably watched maybe half an hour in total across all the games.
Yeah, so I definitely watched all the games because I'm a true fan, unlike Prashant. Um, yeah, I think it's a funny one because it comes back to that question of does a manager kind of come into a new club and bring in their preferred tactics, or do they try and make the best out of what they have, and kind of the tactic will evolve from there. I think Pochettino last year was more of the latter, whereas with Maresca we're definitely seeing him trying to imprint his philosophy, which again I think this is something that the board clearly wanted. They wanted somebody with a clear philosophy and a coach, as in somebody who's also a good coach at teaching, you know. So I think you could definitely see that. I mean, that was definitely most evident from preseason that system wise the players were trying to implement it. The problem is, you see a lot of rotation during these preseason games. So it's very hard for them to develop consistency. And again, that is evident from the matches that I watched. And yeah, I think overall I like the idea of building up that way. It's just again, it's a very drastic change from whatever we had previously. And I feel like I say that every season. Each time Chelsea wrap up a season, a manager is let go or the system is changed, you know? And then it's a drastic change because the new manager wants to bring in new ideas and new tactics.
So, what was your take on the setup in preseason, the tactical approach? Maresca has a very clear ideology, from what I understand, in terms of what he expects out of the system. Seems to be like a 3-2-5, if I understand. Is that right? What's your take? How did you see it evolving? And let's hear the tacticos thoughts.
Yeah, so you're absolutely spot on. I mean, this guy has come in and basically said we're going to use a 3-2-5 in possession. Of course, it's more of a 4-2-5. Well, at times, and I can explain that further, especially during first phase build up, which is more in our half. But yes, essentially, he's come in with this belief that the 3-2-5 is the way forward, and we're seeing a lot of other teams implement this in different ways. But just because he comes in with a formation doesn't mean that we're going to see the same football as City or whoever else is playing it, because you've got different players, and obviously in the roster, and each one has their own strengths and weaknesses. So he's got to find roles within the 3-2-5 that kind of complement each other. And I think we saw him struggle with that a bit during preseason, because I guess a lot of players being around is not great either. But yes, I guess even though he's got a defined system, the roles within it are still kind of flexible. He has to kind of figure out what works for each player. So if I quickly run through what he wants to do, or what he has proclaimed, is that yes, he wants to build from the back. He wants to play it out from the back as much as possible. Now this means he wants to keep it short most of the time, but he will go long. because sometimes going long over the top of the opposition defense or over the top of the opposition midfield behind them, but in front of their defense, it kind of allows you, if done correctly, to again maintain possession and maintain control, and that's his entire philosophy. He wants to control the game. Arteta wants to dominate, but Maresca wants to control. I think it's the same thing. And maybe later on, if there's time, I can highlight some incongruencies that I see. And I don't know whether, those incongruencies are down to the learning curve that the players are going through, or whether Maresca is also adapting a bit to the squad, rather than being wholeheartedly committed to his system. And one hint at that, the answer to that is we did see him change the system slightly against Inter, but I'll get there in a second. So, what he lined up with for the majority of preseason was the 3-2-5. Like I said, he wants to build out from the back as much as possible. And where the press is very high from the opposition, he actually allows the goalkeeper to step to the edge of his box to one side of the central center back, essentially to create one more passing option and make sure that there's an angle for them to maintain possession horizontally before playing it forward. So that's pretty straightforward. We've seen now a lot of teams either play with three at the back, but what he's doing is he's inverting one of the two fullbacks. Well, we saw Reece James move into central midfield, and Colwill majority of the time was inverting into the center of defense to the left side. So again, I don't know how much to take of that. He may, again, play it differently, because obviously Reece is not there, and I don't think Gusto offers the same steel and balance in the midfield. But in any case, one of the fullbacks will, like you say, invert into the midfield, and the opposite fullback on the other flank will invert but stay in the defensive line. So that's how you're keeping your three at the back, and the two in the midfield is being formed, because the inverted wingback, let's say, who's going into midfield, is actually accompanying the deeper midfielder, the defensive midfielder. What this allows you to do, in theory, is then create a front five, and how that tends to break down most of the time is you've got two wingers who play very wide on either flank, and you've got two tens. They may start as eights, and they may drop as deep as eights do to get the ball sometimes, as we saw in preseason. I think that was one thing to note. But yeah, I think they end up being tens, and they end up having to support the striker, because otherwise the striker would get very isolated in the system. And the idea of the striker primarily is to push the defensive line back. But in scenarios where maybe there are gaps in central midfield while we're building up, the striker is allowed to drop in and collect the ball in turn and allow runners to go beyond him to create space in behind. So I think that's kind of a brief, not so brief breakdown of maybe how the 3-2-5 works in theory, and the overarching idea behind it. Because what it allows you to do is essentially keep a relatively solid rest defense, which is a defense you keep while you're in attack mode, and at the same time you have five players allocated across the back line of the opposition. So it allows you to push them back. And what it also allows you to do is counter press very well. So I think it remains to be seen on how well everyone executes these things. From what I saw in preseason, the counter pressing was not great. And there's no surprise there, because Conor Gallagher was not playing. And again, in possession, we were not great because we were not actually controlling the ball as much as the system requires us to. And this is what I was referring to earlier, where I wonder if that's to do with Maresca adapting his style of play, or whether the players are still adapting to the 3-2-5. Because the 3-2-5 works when you keep the ball. When you lose it, there are huge gaps to be taken advantage of, as we saw in preseason.
Oh wow, man. Okay, so that's really insightful. I mean, like I said, I didn't watch the games, but I think you really captured sort of the system. And I'd be interested to see, obviously, those are preseason games. So given that we have the matches starting now, it'd be interesting to see how the system evolves. And I think we should probably do a deeper tactical analysis next time around. What do you think?
I mean, dude, that would be my one of my lifelong dreams. So yes, please.
Done. So yeah, look forward to a tactical analysis with Sharon's take on it as well. A deeper tactical analysis, let's say, next time around. Okay, so we're going to move on to what we think is going to happen in the upcoming games, our predictions. Obviously, the big one is a season opener versus City at home. So that's happening on the 18th of August, followed by the first leg of our Conference League playoff versus Servette on the 22nd, followed by Wolves away on the 25th, and then Crystal Palace at home on the 1st of September. So, Sharon, mate, what are your predictions for these?
I mean, first of all, this is really trial by fire. He's already got like a game against City to start off, and then he's got a European double header. And Wolves and Palace. I mean, Chelsea have made them look like good teams in the past few years. So,
Yeah, true.
for City, straight off the bat, I think I'm gonna. Oh man, yeah, so I'm very superstitious. I'm very very superstitious when it comes to
Yes.
Chelsea. Like I never say we're going to win. I never bet on us winning. So I'm gonna say we lose 1-0 to City because I want to
Okay.
spare Mesco some opening day blushes. What do you reckon, man?
Hugely optimistically, obviously, I would say a win, but I don't think that looks likely. I'd be happy with a draw. I think picking up a point on the opening fixture versus the champions would be a decent start given the losses we've had over the preseason as well. So I think a draw would be good. It would also show some improvement over the preseason versus them as well. And then post that, of course, we have Servette, the doubleheader. And I mean, personally, when I look at the config, I think we should be winning that. So over the two legs, I think we go through, be confident to say a win in both legs.
Man, yeah, I'm gonna say we go through, and I will take all the blame if we don't, because I really hate saying the fact that we'll win anything.
If you want, you can just say skip. I'll say what I think. With Wolves away, like you said, we've made Wolves and Palace look good, but I think we should be beating these teams, especially if we have to show that there's improvement on last season. So I want to say wins in both.
Okay, well, let me put it to you this way. I think after these first five games, I think we will qualify for the Conference League, and we will have 2 points on the Premier League table before the
Okay.
first international break.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay. So you're
pessimistic,
not
optimistic, realistic.
right.
I mean, you can put me
Right.
wherever you want, mate, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not looking great, is what I'm saying.
This is the vibes versus the tactical talking. It's so clear.
Yep.
So clear. Okay, great. So with that, I think we've reached the end of a longer than anticipated intro pod. We will be on socials as well. You can follow us at We Burn Blue Pod. And we look forward to sharing our thoughts more over the rest of the season. Up the Blues.